tour. To be honest, originally it was going to be 2,000 years of Jewish history from 81 to the present, but when Matt asked me to teach, but then I started researching and I'm like, oh, I keep learning more and I gotta include this and I gotta include that and then eventually the study became just the first 73 years. So this is what I'm going to cover is the Jewish-Roman War. The first thing I want to talk about is why should we as Christians know about this? This is Jewish history. This is Roman history. Why would anybody other than a historian need to know about this? Well, the answer is that this war that happened, this was the destruction of Jerusalem. This was prophesied in the Bible. Jesus prophesied it. It's also in the Old Testament. I'm not going to get into the verses this week, but I'll get to them later. But they were prophesied. We don't have the book of the fulfilled prophecies of, we don't have a book that tells us these are the fulfilled prophecies. So all we have to do is look at the Bible and look at history, but we need to know the history. And fortunately, we have a very in-depth writing of what actually happened. There was it's mainly, the sources are actually mainly one person. It happened to be a Jewish person, a Pharisee, who was in Rome at the time doing trying to get Jewish priests that were held hostage in Rome. He met in front of Emperor Nero. He was one of the younger guys on the trip, but he came back from Rome back to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was in a civil war at the time. He was chosen by the other Jewish leaders, even though he was in his late 20s. He was a very intelligent guy. His father was from a priestly line. His mother was from a royal line. So they said, his name was, his actual Roman name is Flavius Josephus, but his Jewish name was like Joseph Netanyahu. But he eventually changed his name. But they asked him to be the Jewish commander for the Galilee region. So he, according to his account, a bit reluctantly, because he was familiar with Rome, he's like, why are we taking on the Romans? We're going to lose. So, but according to his accounts, he reluctantly went up to the Galilee region from Jerusalem, and he became the commander of the Galilee Jewish army to fight against the Romans. And the Romans came in 67 AD. This was Commander Vespasian and his son Titus. And Josephus had fortified all the cities in the north of Israel, the Galilee region, and they were, one by one, all the villages and the fortified cities were falling. And Josephus, he brought some of his army to a city called Yotapata, which is in the mountainous region of the Galilee area. It's about halfway between the Mediterranean Sea and the Sea of Galilee. And they went to this most fortified city in the Galilee region, and they were all able to hold off for like 47 days against the Romans. The account is, according to Josephus, that they were amazed by his intelligence and his strategy of how to hold off the Romans. One of the things he did is he took a weed called fenugreek and he boiled it in water, and then he poured it all over the city walls, and it's very, very slippery when it touches the surface. The Romans had these siege ramps, and they have little sandals with metal nails on them, so they were slipping all over the place on these siege ramps. There was other things he did, but eventually somebody escaped from Yotapata, and he was a defector. He told General Vespasian, he said, the leader is Josephus, and Commander Josephus, and he says that we'll only be able to hold the city for 47 days. So that prediction came true. The Romans took the city in 47 days. Josephus was hiding in a cave with 40 other men, and they were there for about 5 days hiding from the Romans. And eventually the Romans found them, and they knew that the Romans found them, so they're like, what do? We were not going to surrender to the Romans. So they entered this suicide pact, and incidentally, there was only 2 people left. It just happened to be Josephus and another guy, and he's like, well, this is ridiculous. There's only 2 of us left. Why would we kill ourselves? Let's surrender to the Romans. So the 2 of them surrendered to the Romans, and you would think Josephus, he's the commander of the Galilean army. Well, we got to take. You'd think that the Roman commanders would take him off to Rome in chains. We got the prisoner. We got the big commander of the Northern Army. But according to his account, his son was intrigued by his intelligence and his. There was another thing that happened that Josephus also, when he was captured, he was also very intelligent, so he spoke like 3 languages, so he probably spoke Latin to them, but he said, I'm a prophet, and you're going to be, he told General Vespasian, you're going to be the next emperor of the civilized world. And so he wasn't put in chains. He was like, wait a minute, I got to hold on to this guy. If he's right, then, and he's a prophet. I mean, he was right about the 47 days. So we did take the city in 47 days. So maybe he's a prophet. He wasn't actually a prophet. He's just a very intelligent man who knew how to get out of a situation. I mean, he had basically 9 lives. He just kept getting out of one pickle after another. So this was another situation where he should have been either killed or sent off in chains to Rome, but he got out of that. And so what happened is they kept him as prisoner, and eventually there was turmoil in Rome. There was it was called the Year of 4 Emperors, and the Roman centurions, the Roman military basically decided to. They saw the turmoil. They said, hey, Commander Vespasian, he's the best one. He should be the emperor. He's the best guy for the job. He's not one of these royal people that inherits a throne. He built his reputation up from the bottom. He's older and wise, and he defeated the Britons, and he defeated the Germans, and so they made him. The military proclaimed General Vespasian the emperor. So he just had to go back to Rome and defeat the other emperor, who happened to be the 3rd one. So they had this guy Josephus. They're like, well, what do we do with him? Oh, he's a prophet. He was right. I'm the commander now, or I'm the emperor now. So they kept him, and they actually ended up releasing him. And I gotta drink my coffee. So they released him, and then they actually made him, he became a Roman citizen, which is why his name is Flavius Josephus. It's not a Jewish name. And they brought him back to Rome, and then they gave him some land in Judea, and they gave him a pension. They gave him an office in the palace of Rome, and so he spent the next 25 years writing, recording all these things that happened. So what happened is General Vespasian did not want the Jewish people, he did not want to conquer them. He saw the walls of Jerusalem. There's 3 walls. There's high, King Solomon and King David spent thousands of years building up this city to be fortified, and he didn't want to try to have to conquer this city. And the Jewish people were a large percentage of the population of the Roman Empire. I heard it was something like 5 or 6% of the population of the Roman Empire. So this was a big deal. They didn't want to conquer the Jewish people. They started off in Galilee, but they didn't want to go to Jerusalem and have to conquer it. So they brought Josephus along, and he's no longer a prisoner now. He's a Roman citizen, and he's a translator. He's a negotiator. So actually it's not Commander Vespasian at this time because he's back in Rome. It's his son, Commander Titus, who takes on the conquest of Jerusalem, and so he uses Josephus as a negotiator to negotiate a surrender. But the Jewish people don't want to surrender. They end up pouncing him on the head with a rock. They thought he was dead. He was knocked unconscious. But he ends up going back to Rome, and he saw the entire siege, the whole 5 months of the siege. So he writes an account of it. And the reason why we have it today is because it was the Christians that preserved it. They said, "Wow, this writing's really important. There's John the Baptist in this, and then there's the Lord Jesus in this, and there's the martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus. That's all in this. And Pontius Pilate. There's a lot we didn't know about Pontius Pilate. That's in this too." So for hundreds of years, the monks would sit down because they didn't have printing presses back then. So the Christian monks would sit for over hundreds of years, just recopy the writings of Josephus, because from a Christian perspective, these writings were very important. So that's why we have them today. So a lot of what I'm going to be, we'll be looking at the Bible, but a lot of what we'll be looking is also Josephus' writings. There's also another historian a Jewish historian called Philo that lived in Alexandria, Egypt, which was the second biggest and most magnificent city of the Roman Empire, after Rome, of course. So I'm going to start with
Randy, I have a question about that picture. Do you know anything about that last picture? Is that actually
this is Mount of Olives.
Is that recent or is that?
Yeah, this is recent. Well, this is like probably the last 20 years or so.
Okay.
So, yeah, you can see the modern city, modern Jerusalem in the background. So that's the Mount of Olives. I think somewhere here there's Mount Scopus, which is actually where General Titus and the Romans, when they were first invading Jerusalem, they looked down from Mount Scopus. So what I'm going to do is kind of follow the way that he structures, the way he covers this 7-year war that happened. He starts a lot with introducing the places, the cities, because a lot of this I didn't know a whole lot of what Israel was like at the time of Christ. So he gives a quite vivid description of the cities and the people. There was quite a bit of antagonists to the Jewish people. Some of them were the Herod dynasty, 4 generations of them, and the other antagonists were the Roman governors. And there was actually a Caesar who almost started a war in 40 AD with the Romans. So one of the places that's part of this Jewish-Roman war is called Machaerus. The other name is called Macaur. The place is actually not in Israel. It's in modern day Jordan, which is why you see the sign of how to find it. That's not Hebrew, that's Arabic. So, and it's called the Memorial of the Prophet Yahweh. So that's what the Muslims call John the Baptist, is the Prophet Yahweh. So this is this is Machaerus. This is one of the fortresses that Herod built. This was actually Herod the Great. We're familiar with it in the Bible because this is the place that John the Baptist was in prison for 2 years and eventually killed. But it wasn't Herod the Great who actually built this fort. It was his son Herod Antipas, and of course his wife Herodias, and their stepdaughter Salome. I have no idea who that guy is. I just took these pictures off of the internet. So here's another sunset picture of it. Now, there's not much left of the fortress. I think most of this is them resetting columns for the tourists. But this was destroyed by the Romans, I believe 71 or 72 AD, after they destroyed Jerusalem, because the Jewish people had, some of them had fled from Jerusalem and other places. They made this another fortress to hold out from the Romans. There's a partially restored royal courtyard. Yeah, this is what based on a lot of this reconstructions are based on Josephus' descriptions of what these fortresses and what these cities looked like. He didn't actually see all of them. He was very familiar with Jerusalem because he lived there just after the time of Christ. He was born in 37 AD. But these places, if he didn't actually see them, like he never saw Masada, but he would interview people, like Roman soldiers. Hey, you were there. What did it look like? So that's where the royal courtyard would be. So this was Herod's palace that he built for his own protection, Herod the Great. But when he died, this was part of the region that Herod Antipas, his son, or he's also in the Bible Herod the Tetrarch. This would have been his party palace. So when he had John the Baptist there, it was Herod Antipas's birthday party, and it was of course Salome that danced. Salome is not actually, her name is not in the Bible. We get that from Josephus. And this is another artist's rendition of what it would have looked like. There's, of course, the courtyard that the tourists were looking at when they were looking at Machaerus. Now this is his actual. It's like a 400-page book that he wrote in Rome he wrote it about 75. They say between like 75 and 79 AD. So this whole war was fresh in his mind when he was writing it down, and the people who were there experienced the war. He could interview them too if there wasn't something he saw or knew about. But this is his account of that fortress. It says, but when Herod came to be king, he thought the place to be worthy of utmost regard and of being built upon in the firmest manner. And this especially because it lay so near to Arabia. See, Arabia wasn't part of the Roman Empire, so they were the enemies. So Judea, which was important to the Romans because that was a nice buffer zone between, I think it was the Parthian Empire, but Judea ended up being a nice buffer zone between the Romans and the other empire. So Herod, being as nervous as he was always clutched onto his kingdom. He didn't want to let anybody have his kingdom, not even some of his sons who he thought were trying to take his kingdom, and ended up killing 3 of them. But and this especially because it lay so near to Arabia, for it is seated in a convenient place on that account and hath a view toward that country. some of it's Old English, so I changed some words like prospect view. And he therefore surrounded a large space of ground with walls and towers and built a city there, out of which city there was a way that led up to the very citadel itself on the top of the mountain. Nay, more than this, he built a wall around that top of the hill and erected towers at the corners. 90 feet. In the middle of which place he built a palace. Now, Herod, because he was nervous, he built all these fortifications all over Judea, this one being in the other side of the Jordan. But he built these palaces because he was nervous, but he also wanted them to be luxurious. So if an army's after him trying to revolt, he's going to be able to hold out for a very long time, and he'll still be able to live in luxury while his troops are conquering the people that are trying to kill him. So in the middle of which place he built a palace after a magnificent manner, wherein were large and beautiful edifices. He also made a great many reservoirs for the reception of water. This was the desert, so if he's going to hold out for months against the siege, he needs water. That's the number one thing. That there might be plenty of it ready for all uses, and those in the properest places that were afforded him there. Thus he did, as it were, contend with the nature of the place, that he might exceed its natural strength and security, which yet itself rendered it hard to be taken by these fortifications, which were made by the hands of men. Moreover, he put a large quantity of darts and other machines of war into it, contrived to get everything thither that might any way contribute to its inhabitants' security, under the longest siege possible. This is classic Herod the Great. Now this is another one of Josephus's accounts that he wrote in Rome. It's called Jewish Antiquities. He didn't write this till almost 20 years after he wrote the Jewish Wars. So this was written in about mid-90s AD. But he says, now some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod, this is Antipas, this is the son of Herod the Great. Antipas's army came from God, and that very justly as a punishment of what he did against John that was called the Baptist. For Herod slew him, who was a good man, and commanded the Jews to exercise virtue, both as to righteousness towards one another, and piety towards God, and so to come to baptism. So this is a Jewish Pharisee writing an account of John the Baptist. Obviously he didn't believe in what John said, but said, hey, he was a good man. Herod was evil. Herod killed him. Accordingly, he was sent a prisoner out of Herod's suspicious temper. Now this is what Josephus gets wrong. It wasn't out of his suspicious temper. We know from the Gospels that it was for Herodias' sake. She wanted him in prison because he challenged her morality. She was married to his brother's, it was actually half brother, but he challenged her marital infidelity. Out of Herod's suspicious temper to Machaerus, the castle I before mentioned, and was there put to death. Now the Jews had an opinion that the destruction of this army was sent as a punishment upon Herod and a mark of God's displeasure to him. So this is just what the rumor that was going around at the time. Now we know from Matthew that at the time Tetrarch, or Herod Antipas, heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, this is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, it is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. So the Herod family it's all very confusing. It took me a while to figure out. But in case you're wondering who Herodias is and why her name is Herodias, well, she was a granddaughter of Herod the Great. She was the daughter of one of Herod's sons through a different wife. Herod had 10 wives. So there was, she was the daughter of Aristobulus, and there's another one of Herod's wives, and then another one of Herod's wives. So she instead, she was arranged marriage to Herod Philip, which was her half uncle, and then she ended up divorcing him and marrying her other half uncle. In case you were confused about the Herod family, I was confused. I'm like, wait. The reason the family's so confusing is there's divorce, there's incest, there's murder. It's very confusing. Now, the other important city in this in Israel at this time is called Caesarea. It's a little confusing because there's two Caesareas. There's one called Caesarea Philippi, which is inland. This is Caesarea Maritima. This is named after Caesar Augustus, which is the first Roman emperor. This is an aerial view of what it looks like now. It was quite the harbor. It was important for Rome too. It wasn't just important for the nation of Israel, for the Jews. It was important for Rome, which is why Rome helped build this massive port city. This is an artist's rendition. I looked into this guy. I was looking at this weird name, Balaj, and I looked that up because I thought the artistry was intriguing because it looks like he's striving for accuracy, and he actually has a interview where he says that his purpose is not to have an artist expression, even though he's an artist. He strives for accuracy. His goal is to take 2D drawings from archaeologists of what the cities actually look like and do a rendition of what he thinks they would have looked like back then. So this is Caesarea Maritima. This actually city was given as a gift. Caesar Augustus gave this to King Herod, the city, as a gift. It was lying in ruins. So Herod built this whole city. It was about 20-something BC to about 22 to 10 BC. He built the city from the ground up that was sitting in ruins. As you can see, it's very Roman. Even though this is in the nation of Israel, this is in Judea. It's a very Roman-looking city, and most of the population was actually not Jewish. Most of the population was Gentile. It was Hellenists and Romans. So you can see the Ben-Hur style chariot racing, and this is a amphitheater, which is actually still there today. They still have concerts there today. And this is one of Herod's palaces that actually, when Rome took over governing Judea, because it was no longer a kingdom, that ended up being the governor's palaces. Their main palace was not in Jerusalem. Their main palace was in Caesarea. So if you had an issue with the governor, you had to go many miles up to Caesarea. So this is where Pontius Pilate would have lived also. And there's the amphitheater with a nice ocean view. They planned that very well. And this is what's left today of Herod's palace. This was actually I read that this was a freshwater swimming pool. Somehow they had aqueduct spring water in, and Herod the Great had a freshwater swimming pool with an ocean view. So They were all about luxury. They lived high on the hog. And this would have been, like I said, Pontius Pilate's palace. There's actually somewhere around here. There's something called the Pilate Stone. It's a replica of the Pilate Stone that was found nearby. I believe it was in the amphitheater where it said Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. Now, I was just curious about that. I ended up looking up that business there. That's actually it's called Caesar stone. So if you have granite countertops in your house, they might have been made from an Israeli company, which actually they're creating jobs. And this is a little side thing, but they're a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ, and they're creating jobs in America. So this is an Israeli company creating granite countertop jobs in America. It's not a warehouse. So there would have been Herod and the Roman governor's swimming pool. There's another angle. As you can see, there's a mosaic floor there. That they a lot of this was preserved because it just for almost 1800 years or so, they just sand filled up that area, and then when they started exploring it, there was hardly any people living there in the 1800s. So when they started excavating it recently, then they found that mosaic floor. Now, the old port in Israel was not Caesarea. It was actually Joppa. That's right next to. You can see the big city, big modern city in Israel in the background. That's Tel Aviv. So this is the old city. It's actually called Joppa. Now, that's what it looks like from an aerial view. And of course, we know Joppa. 35 miles northwest of Jerusalem in the Mediterranean Sea. We know Joppa because of this guy. This was Jonah. Jonah, where are you going? You're supposed to be going, Nineveh, not Tarshish, not 2,500 miles away. So there's Jonah 1:3. Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee into Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he was told to go preach to the Gentiles, and I'm not going. They're going to kill me. So the new port, Caesarea Maritima, built over 2,000 years. There's 2210 BC it was built by Herod the Great with Roman engineering and largesse. Rome had the money. Herod had money too from taxes, taxing the Judean people. Accomplished this feat by constructing a whole metropolis with a colossal harbor that would make Caesarea the maritime trading oasis of its day. Dedicating the city to Augustus, the area which Herod chose to build began a locale of habitation by the Phoenician state of Sidon. I'm not going to read all of that. So Herod the Great had Stratton's Tower added to his kingdom by Caesar Augustus, as Josephus records. So this is Josephus' account of Herod the Great. What happened to Herod and the reason he was king? Well, he was originally a king. He was made king of a small region in Judea by Mark Antony, but when Julius Caesar was killed, there was a power vacuum. There was nobody to rule, and Mark Antony wanted to rule Rome, and there was also a man named Octavian, which is actually Augustus. His original name was Octavian, but it was Octavian versus Mark Antony and Cleopatra. So they fought this huge war called the Battle of Actium, unfortunately for Herod the Great, he was sided with the loser. So when you side with the loser and you wear a crown and you're the one that made you a king just got killed, you're in big trouble. So you have to go beg for, to be made a king again, and that's exactly what he did. So, but now Herod was under immediate concern about a most important affair on account of his friendship with Anthony. So this is Mark Antony, who was already overcome at the Battle of Actium. That was that huge, I don't know if you heard about it in History Channel, or it's this huge naval battle that was fought between Octavian and on one side and Mark Antony and Cleopatra on the other side. And Mark Antony and Cleopatra fled. They were losing the naval battle. They fled in ships, and they eventually ended up committing suicide. So now Herod the Great wants to stay king, so he's going to Caesar Augustus to see what he can do for himself. So, yet he was more afraid than hurt. He sailed to Rhodes, which is in modern day, well, that's in Greece, where Caesar then abode, and he came to him without his diadem. So I think I'm gonna leave the crown home, because if I go to the winner and I sided with the loser and I'm wearing a crown, I'm in big trouble. So, and in the habit and appearance of a private person, but in his behavior as a king. So I'm kind of imagining Wizard of Oz, like the lion. I don't know what a kingly spirit is, but I guess he doesn't have his crown. But if I were the king of the forest, no. So he's going to him all pompous, and "Oh Caesar, as I was made king of the Jews by Anthony, so do I profess that I have used my royal authority in the best manner and entirely for his advantage. Nor will I conceal this further, that thou hast certainly found me in arms and an inseparable companion of his. And I would desire that thou wilt first consider how faithful a friend, and not whose friend I have been." So he's like, "Oh, I was very good friends to Anthony. I was very loyal. So don't take into account that it was him that I was loyal to. It was just take into account that I was very loyal. And now you're the winner. You won the Battle of Actium, and now you're the king of the. You're the emperor. You're the most powerful person in the civilized world. So please do something for me."
Ride your coattail for a while.
So Caesar replied to him, "Nay, thou shalt not only be in safety, but thou shalt be a king." So he's going to be made a king again. "And that more firmly than thou was before, for thou art worthy to reign over a great many subjects, by reason of the fastness of thy friendship. And do thou endeavor to be equally constant in thy friendship to me, upon my good success, which is what I depend upon from the generosity of thy disposition." When the Caesar had spoken such obliging things to the king, and had put the diadem upon his head, so he's now King Herod is now king again. He proclaimed what he had bestowed on him by a decree. Not only bestow other marks of honor upon him, but made an addition to his kingdom by giving him not only the country which had been taken from him by Cleopatra, but so he was getting in skirmishes with Cleopatra, and he lost some territory. And of course Cleopatra was the queen of Egypt. But besides that, Gadara, Hippos, and Samaria, and moreover the maritime cities Gaza, Athodon, and Joppa, and Stratos Tower. So it was called Stratos Tower at the time, but because it was a gift from Caesar Augustus, he said, "Well, I gotta call it Caesarea, name it after him," and he built this huge temple right at the port. He also made him a present of 400 Galatians as a bodyguard, which they had been to Cleopatra before. Moreover, after the first games of Actium, he added to his kingdom both the region of. Now these are just kind of words, but this is basically he's given him regions in Syria. Some of this is the modern day Golan Heights. Some of this is just west of Damascus. So, I was also reading about Caesarea Maritima, and apparently it's like a big thing that scientists like to study. So, because there was hydraulic cement, the way that this was an artificial port, it wasn't a natural port, so they had to use hydraulic cement, and they're like, well, where did this material come from? Apparently, so it says historically dated the 1st century BC, the structure was erected by Herod the Great as the largest ancient artificial harbor in the open sea. So this was the largest artificial harbor in the world at that time, was in Judea. Furthermore, so Judea, we kind of maybe think of it as deserty and kind of backwater country, but at the time of Christ, this was a amazing country. This was, with amazing cities. So let's see, I'll skip this. Standing the test of time, Roman concrete is very resilient. One only has to look at structures like the Pantheon in Rome or the harbor at Caesarea Maritima in Israel to see that this is true, but it is as durable as modern concrete. According to the findings, so the way they built this massive port was they used Roman hydraulic cement. Roman concrete was, as well as being just as durable, Roman concrete was also more eco-friendly. This is a California university. Eco-friendly than our modern recipe, which consists of lime and clay. This mixture requires that it be heated at high temperatures and results in significant carbon dioxide emission. Roman hydraulic concrete, on the other hand, was made from pumice, mortar, lime, volcanic ash from Italy. Pozzolana is what it was called. Fired at much lower temperatures, thereby creating the eco-friendly Roman concrete. While it takes longer for Roman concrete to set, it is just as durable as modern concrete, so that might become the new standard.
Well, the heating it made it much more durable than modern concrete. I recently read an article about that.
Oh, really?
But they heated, I think, to like 200 some degrees, and the concrete then, it's like, almost like a rock, it just doesn't heat. Where modern concrete doesn't hold up to it.
I'm not sure how they made it like underwater.
Well, yeah, I
So
don't know
they
about
dropped
that.
stones and so they were trying to figure out where this hydraulic concrete apparently came from a volcano in Naples, Italy. So this is actually where they think the Roman mine was, where they were digging up this material that they used for the hydraulic cement from super volcano. And there's Naples right there. Naples is like 3 million people, so I think it would be a little nervous if I were living right next to a super volcano. So again, this is Balazs Blok. He's the artist that did this design. From what I heard from his interview, he said his artwork is actually displayed in the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. And this is what an aerial artist's view of what it would have looked like. This is an actual aerial view. Now this is reenactors. This is a famous Bible story that happened there. This is not actually Peter and Cornelius, but this is actors trying to dress up and look like Romans or Hellenist Romans. But I'm gonna take a look at the famous passage that happened in the book of Acts. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion. Now, by the way, who was Cornelius? He was the first, but he was the first what?
Italian.
And his family.
Roman.
Well, they were the first one of us.
Italian.
They were the first Gentile converts.
Was it
So-
Italian man?
Yeah, he was
The
Italian.
Italian band.
So this is why this story is so important, is that, I'm assuming every one of us in this room, this is the first family of us, the Gentile converts, happened right in Caesarea Maritima. Now, there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment, a devout man and one who feared God with all his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God. Now, about the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. And when he observed him, he was afraid and said, "What is it, Lord?" And he was a Gentile, but he wasn't a proselyte. He didn't convert to Judaism, but he was somebody who was respected by the Jewish people. He didn't believe in the Roman gods. He wasn't offering sacrifices to the Roman gods. He believed in the God of the Jews. And when he observed him, and he said to him, "Your prayers and your alms have come up for a memorial before God." So God was pleased, in the eyes of God, God was pleased with Cornelius and his family. It says, "Now send men to Joppa and send for Simon, whose surname is Peter." Now Peter is in Joppa. So we have another city where another person who bit reluctantly but is told to go to the Gentiles and preach a message. And of course this person says, well, this is Peter, so he's lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. He will tell him what you must do. And when the angel who spoke to him had departed, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier among those who waited on him continually. So Cornelius is sending 3 people to Peter. So when he had explained all these things to them, he sent them to Joppa. The next day, so Joppa's still on the coast, but it's like several miles south. And they went on their journey and drew near the city. Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. That would be 12 in the afternoon. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat, but while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven open and an object like a great sheet bound at 4 corners descending to him and let down to earth. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. Now at this time Peter was a Christian, but he was still eating kosher, so he didn't understand that it wasn't explained to the Jewish people who converted to Christianity that they didn't have to eat kosher anymore and they weren't under certain laws. And a voice came to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never..." So Peter's telling the Lord, "No." Now, if somebody's your Lord, the one thing you should be telling them is no. So Cornelius, who is a Gentile, he doesn't he's loves the Lord and he's doing good things, but he immediately does what he says. This is Peter, who was with the Lord for 3.5 years, and he's saying, "No, I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And a voice spoke to him again the second time, "What God has cleansed you must not call common." Now there is the spiritual application too, which he was being taught that the gospel's going out to Gentiles. It's not just going to be for Jews anymore. This was done 3 times. This is Peter. Everything needs to be told to him 3 times. And the object was taken up into heaven. Now while Peter wondered within himself what this vision which he had seen meant, behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate, and they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there. While Peter thought about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men are seeking you." Now I wonder if each one of these men lined up and said, "We're here to bring you to Caesarea to bring this guy a message." So this is Peter. He needs to be told everything 3 times. So there's 3 men going to Joppa to get Peter. "Arise, therefore, go down and go to them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them."
Now think about what just went down here. These three guys, Cornelius comes in and says, these voices in my head just told me to send you to look for a guy for Peter in Joppa. What, 1,000 miles away? And then they show up and say, is Peter here?
Are you 1,000? What's this?
Well, no. Cornelius sends him to Joppa to look for a guy named Peter. How far apart?
Oh, it's about 8 miles or 10 miles. Well, actually 20 miles, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think about 20
I
miles.
thought, okay, yeah, I was thinking he was over the other side of the Mediterranean. But anyway, and then they show up and say, is he here? They're going on the word of Cornelius. Okay, they're not going on anything else. They're going on the word of Cornelius. They're going to show up at this particular place, this particular house, and find this particular guy. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a lot of faith. More so than Cornelius himself.
Alright, so Peter went down to the men who had been sent to him from Cornelius and said, yes, I am he who you seek. For what reason have you come? And he said, Cornelius the centurion, a just man, one who fears God and has good reputation among all the Gentiles, was divinely instructed by a holy angel to summon you to his house to hear words from you. Then he invited them in and lodged them. On the next day, Peter went with them. Some brethren from Joppa accompanied him, and the following day they entered Caesarea. So it was about a 2 days journey. Now Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. As Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. This is the Roman. He doesn't understand. All this needs to be explained. He's bowing down before Peter. Peter has to explain to him that I'm just a man. There's only one person you bow down before. So Peter lifted him up, saying, stand up, I myself am also a man. As he talked with him, he went in and found many who had come together. Then he said to them, you know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company with or go to one of another nation. So he wasn't even supposed to be going into his house, and he stayed a couple days there. But God had shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Therefore I came without objection as soon as I was sent for. I asked then, for what reason have you sent me? So Cornelius said, 4 days ago, so it was, like I said, 2 days journey, I was fasting until this hour, and at the 9th hour I prayed in my house, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing, and said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, your alms are remembered in the sight of God. Send therefore Joppa and call Simon, whose surname is Peter. He is lodging in the house of Simon, a tanner by the sea. When he comes, he will speak to you. So I sent you to you immediately, and you have done well to come. Now therefore we are all present before God to hear all things. So here Peter's giving him the full understanding. Cornelius might have heard about Jesus, but he didn't hear the actual gospel. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, in truth I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. So this was kind of new to the Jewish Christians at the time. Interesting that it was happening at Joppa, two people called. The word which God sent to the children of Israel, preaching peace through Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. The word you know, which was proclaimed throughout all Judea and began from Galilee after the baptism which John preached. How God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit with power, who went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil. For God was with him, and we are witnesses of all things which he did both in the land of the Jews and in Jerusalem, whom they killed by hanging on a tree. God raised up on the third day and showed him openly. So this is not just Cornelius, but his whole household, not to all the people, but to witnesses chosen before by God, even to us who ate and drank with him before he arose from the dead. Drank with him after he arose from the dead. He commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that it is he who was ordained by God to be judge of the living and the dead. To him all the prophets witness that through his name, whoever believes in him will receive remission of sins. While Peter was still speaking these words, the Holy Spirit fell upon all those who heard the word. So this is Cornelius, his whole household, they all believed. And afterwards, when they believed, they received the Holy Spirit. And they were baptized. And those of the circumcision who believed were astonished, and many as came with Peter, because the gift of the Holy Spirit had been poured out on the Gentiles also, for they heard them speak with tongues and magnify. Then Peter answered, Can anyone forbid water, that these should not be baptized who have received the Holy Spirit, just as we have? And he commanded them to be baptized in the name of the Lord. Then they asked him to stay a few days. That was very new for, man, what's this Jewish guy staying with you for 2 days? They're not supposed to do that. Let's see, at least we got a few more minutes. So the other important place, this is, I don't know if you've, probably some of you are familiar with this place. Can anybody? Masada. So this was another one of Herod's fortresses. As you can see, it was conquered by the Romans in 73 AD. This is, the Romans took enormous time building that ramp there, which is here today, so they could get their siege ramps up. This is another artist's drawing of what Herod would have built, what would have looked like back in the day. As you can see, safety and security, that's what was important to him as a king. He was holding on to his kingdom. He had to keep his eyes out for Cleopatra and anybody else, or the Jewish people, or anybody else that was coming after him. This is another aerial photo. Now this is his account, Josephus' account. Said there was a rock not small in circumference and very high. It was encompassed with valleys of such vast depth and downward that the eye could not reach their bottoms. They were abrupt and such as no animal could walk upon, excepting at 2 places. So this was accessible on the west and accessible on the east. But they weren't easily accessible, where it subsides in order to afford a passage for ascent. Though not without difficulty. Now, of the ways that lead to it, one is from, he called it Lake Asphaltris, which is Salt Sea. It's called the Dead Sea now. Towards the rising sun, and another on the west where the ascent is easier. So the path that if you want to hike up it, if you go to Israel, it's called the Snake Path. That's a bit more arduous than taking the ski lift up. Well, it's not, you can't ski up there, but you get what I'm saying. The one of these ways is called the Serpent. So this is Josephus' account. He's probably interviewing Roman soldiers that maybe conquered it. There was 2 women and 5 children that also survived this siege. They perhaps gave their account or passed them on to other Romans. So as resembling that animal of its narrowness and its perpetual windings, for it is broken off at the prominent precipices of rock and returns frequently into itself like it again, by little and little hath much ado to proceed forward. And he that would walk along it must first go on one leg and then on the other. This is also nothing but destruction in case your feet slip, for on each side there is a vastly deep chasm and precipice sufficient to quell the courage of every body by the terror it infuses into the mind. So this is tourists walking up it. Here's another view. This is, I guess, a busy day. Now it's a little safer than it was 2,000 years ago. They have guardrails now. Now upon this top of the hill, Jonathan the high priest, so this is before Herod. It was actually used as a fortress. I believe it was the Hasmoneans or Maccabees is another name. First of all, built a fortress and called it, so this is when it was called Masada, after which the rebuilding of this palace employed the care of King Herod to a great degree. He also built a wall round about the entire top of the hill. Moreover, he built a palace therein at the western ascent. It was within and beneath the walls of the citadel, but inclined to the north. Now the wall of this place was very high and strong, and had on its four corner towers 6 cubits high. The furniture also of the edifice and the cloisters and the baths were of great variety, very costly, and these buildings were supported by pillars of single stones on every side. The walls and also the floors of the edifices were paved with stones of several colors. So I'm gonna stop at Masada, and then next week I'll continue introducing some of the characters. I'll get into the governors. One of them of specific note is Pontius Pilate. And he's in the Christian Bible, but Jewish historians they have quite a angry account of Pontius Pilate and the things he did. I'll cover that next week. The accounts of Pontius Pilate and the other governors that were antagonists in this war that eventually resulted 66 AD. All right, so that's it for now.